That's it. We're nice and close together. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helga Davis, and I have the great honor of having been invited here to have a conversation, if you will, with Kristy and Joe. And I'm glad that you're all here. I wanted to start out by remembering. Do you remember when we first met, Joe? I'm going to tell you.
That's good.
It was 2011, and Rachel Chanoff invited me here to, do a little thing. And so I made something called The Love Show. And I didn't know you, I hadn't seen you, I knew nothing. And I saw this guy poke his head into our performance and not say anything. Just kind of went away. And years later, I asked Rachel, and she said, "Oh yeah, that was Joe." And when I told him you were coming, he said, "Who?" And what's great about that, well, look at us now, Joe. What's great about that is that I never felt that I was in the wrong place. So maybe you didn't know my name immediately or what I was going to do, but I was still invited to explore, to bring my friends, and to begin what now has been all these years of coming back here and working and trying out ideas. So thank you for that first introduction.
Helga, thank you. It was one of the pleasures of my life getting to watch you, and one of the ultimate pleasures was a few lucky of us, got serenaded with your Star-Spangled Banner at a dinner. Do you remember that one?
I sure do.
That was one of the most lovely performances. My only thing, it was so beautiful and it felt so at me, I naively thought you wrote it for me.
Well, Joe, I didn't.
I know.
There is a lot of love there, nonetheless. Kristy, I don't even remember, when you know people so long that you don't remember not knowing them? So I don't remember when we met, but I do remember when you were at the Park Avenue Armory, there was a huge New Year's Eve celebration. And we were all supposed to sign up way before, and I didn't manage to do that, but I did go for the pre-celebration. And I ran into you, and you said, "Aren't you coming to ring in the new year?" And I said, no, it's okay. You have a lot of people in there, and it's super overcrowded. And you grabbed my hand, and we went through the door, and we ran into the middle of the space, just in time for you to say, "Happy New Year!" And it wasn't the first time that you held my hand and invited me to do something. And so I want to say thank you for that also.
Thank you.
Here we go. I've been asking around, asking for the one word or two words that folks would use to describe both of you. And the words there were two words that kept coming up: maverick and contrarian. And that you were each both of these things in your own way. Would you agree with that? Yes, you do.
I like the way this conversation's going, by the way.
Would you speak to this notion as part of who you are as people and part of the strategy of your leadership?
Oh, well, yeah, I think those two words feel okay to me, actually. I mean, last night at this really spellbinding, beautiful piece of performance fireworks that Kristy arranged to bring Saigo Chang here, there was a big area that was roped off with yellow stand-back ribbon, and it was meant to keep people out, clearly, and out from underneath the path of these 25 rockets that Tsai bombarded the clock tower with. It was really felt right to be under attack at the end of that. And my immediate, I don't know why, I immediately hopped on the other side of that yellow and was standing out there, and 3 or 4 people said, "Joe, the reason the yellow chain is there is to keep people out." And I don't know, so you're right, my immediate instinct, everything in my body said jump over that. So yeah, I think you nailed part of who I am anyway.
And what would you say, how does it apply to your leadership style?
Oh, well, that's different. First of all, I don't know, the maverick part, in our gathering last night, that room was filled with dozens, if not hundreds, of people who truly joined together, and that's not just fluff. There were many people who signed on to this project in one way or another against the odds, and I was one of them. But there was a force field of determination, and I don't know. That's fine. The contrarian part, yeah, I do feel it's a deep contrarian urge. I'll tell one very personal story, which I've never told before, and it cuts deep, and I hope it doesn't upset anybody, but it might. In those very difficult days post-COVID and right after the George Floyd murder, when every institution and company was making these very long, flowery statements, heartfelt, important things being said, but I didn't like many of them. I don't know why. It bothered me. And it bothered me because the words seemed cant and repeated and not felt, and every instinct in my body was to not do that. But instead, I had an idea. I was like, let's let the artists who are here say it, because it's what we do. We're a platform, and there was an artist, Ere, who had a piece up at that time, which was a quote by Thomas Jefferson that said, "If God is just, I tremble for my country." And he was thinking on himself, he was a slave holder, he was one of the great leaders of the country. And I thought that piece of art by a Mexican American quoting one of the leaders of the fallen, ruminating on his life and country, and we all know that Jefferson had. So there was one. I wanted to put Nick Cave's beautiful, so that I thought we'll post that, and we'll post Nick Cave's beautiful, that hand he did. He cast his hand in bronze, holding a gun, and then he took the gun out and he pointed it up, as if maybe to heaven and took the gun out. So it was a symbol of looking up. I thought we'll put that on, and then Jenny Holzer's abuse of power, and it comes as no surprise. I thought those 3 images, and it went over like a lead balloon.
It sort of still is, I think, right now.
It's what? It's what?
It sort of still is right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know it is, but the reason I bring that up in talking about the contrarian one was I think that was a deeply, I felt it. I just felt it, and I love those 3 works of art, and it felt to me like an appropriate response, but it was not, and my colleagues told me so in no uncertain terms, and I think they were right in some ways, but it was just an example. So that's an example of having a contrary leadership style that sometimes goes astray, and you've got to have open ears. Anyway, that's the reason.
Kristy, what would you say?
Yeah.
When I suppose on the contrary, or the contrarian side, to me, from a position of leadership's not just, in my system, being at the top of some pyramid. It's like you're sort of an intersection along a figure eight. And sometimes in that, the contrarianness part is the working with many to elicit a coming along towards us collectively looking at something that might otherwise not be seen or not be pursued. Like, contrary to me is the disruption of complacency. Not...
Contrarian is what? The opposite?
For me, in
yeah.
leadership style, I suppose, is the disruption of complacency.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or sometimes one has to take a contrary path or a path that is not obvious and take responsibility for saying, hey, let's try this direction. And it's a contrary path because it's one that wasn't seen. Mm-hmm. And then the maverick side is to be, I think, similarly so, but it's so vastly important that it is not confused with being cavalier. The cavalier is the thing I avoid at all times in every way I possibly can, although I'm around a lot of cavalier moments. The maverick moment, I think, has a deeper kind of poetic of accepting authentic responsibility for something that is, again, pushing against, I don't know, the lull of mediocrity in order to not allow that to be the thing that gets tarted up and passed as excellence or something extraordinary because it's familiar, that we lift towards moving things in new paths, which takes some kind of contrary, and it takes usually some kind of maverick.
But it's also in the bones of the place.
Utterly.
Because you say, it has been said that MASS MoCA isn't only a museum, it's something else. And so what's the something else?
For me, the something else, I mean, similarly, if we look at sometimes for an art museum or an art space or an institution, to demonstrate that it's succeeding, it begins to close off and make things appear perfect. Or that somehow, and in doing that, in achieving those kinds of moments, that closure of an aperture or that closure of something stops enabling the liberty and freedom of trying. And so for me, what is the something else here is that artists, first and foremost, but of all of us working with in accompaniment to an artist pursuing their vision, the space doesn't close off, the oxygen in the room doesn't leave, and the artist can breathe to the fullest of what we can all attempt together. So it's something else because it's not already determined that it's awesome. It's the process of finding what could be that is the something else.
What about for you, Joe?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's beautiful. For me, the something else here had a little bit to do with it's sort of and it came a lot from just sheer need, was the need to listen closely to others, to partner in very meaningful, deep, recurring ways, and to allow all kinds of points of view. And museums, I'm not one who's like, I don't get all riled up when somebody says, oh, museums are a voice of authority. To me, a voice of authority is not always all bad. You need multiple voices, and you want people who know what the heck they're doing and what they're talking about, a wide range of people. And so, having this place that's just simply large enough and a place that can a wide range of partners and people and kinds of performers and institutions, and of just a huge number of, we've been so lucky to be joined by, people like whatever, Laurie Anderson, and people coming into like Jenny and
What about
Saul.
me, Jill?
I was just
Helga.
and Helga. It's like,
Well, I'm still trying to remember that 2011 moment. Actually,
Star Spangled
no,
Banner.
but to me, this place is just kind of loose jointed and has a lot of moving parts and interesting parties and great artists throwing and kicking and making new work. And for me, that's why it always carried a little bit. I don't know. It just felt a little more open to the world, a platform in a way that made it feel like something other than a museum.
I just want to add another piece of it, and it's a critical one, is also the pieces that the staff have. The staff's pursuit of, could we try it this way? Well, let's try, right? Not, there's only this way, that's it. So the great grand joy of truly problem solving, it's not that the problem's solved and fixed and you're doing minor tinkering. It is, let's make the problem. The problem is being presented. Let's solve that thing together. And a lot of people come around it. So even the exhibition design, when you watch an artist in that, and the curators are like, gosh, well, if we knock down this wall and we rebuild it this way, you mean I can do that? Or could we drill into the floor? Yeah, that's going to work. These ways in which problems are solved are kind of the pursuit of a participation in making something more holistically. That is another special ingredient here. Same with board members. Same with, philanthropy and people who contribute. They also come with ideas, intelligence, and a committed spirit for the place that is not about how does it become, the Met. It's how does it keep becoming itself.
Kristy, your answer to that reminded me vividly of something that Kathy Hallbright told me once. When she retired, a great director of the Walker Art Center and a wonderful person, when she announced her retirement after, I can't remember, it was 20 or 25 years at the Walker, I called her and said, how did you know the time? And her answer was the mirror image of what you just said, which was that she said, in one 2 or 3 week period, I found myself saying to my very smart, young, excited staff, we tried that already. Or, no, yeah, we did that and it didn't work. And she said these were all new, good ideas that in her brain she said, I knew right then it was time to move on to someplace else. And it's so lovely to hear you say just the opposite. So I feel very good about that.
So why don't we take that question to you? How did you know that it was time?
Well, part of it was that story that Kristy didn't want me to finish just now when I started. Like when you feel strongly in that way, and the people who you really respect and admire and love come to you and say, "Yeah, gee, you're off the wall on this one," and you hear that a couple of times. That was a signal to me. That was a signal, and also, I really believe that that arts institutions, the leadership of arts institutions, that it shouldn't be a lifetime sport. I don't know what the right number is. It's not 5 years. It's maybe 10 or 15 or maybe 20. It's somewhere in that range. I don't think it's 30 or 40 actually. And I was pushing 34 years here, so I just had this strong belief that there's a time in institutional life for fresh faces, new ideas, vigor, a bigger look at it in a completely different way. And in fact, I delayed mine a little bit because of COVID, actually. It came in and it's like, this is no real time to cut out. Sort of those kinds of feelings and just general vibe.
You spent a lot of your professional life here. And Kristy, you've had multiple experiences running festivals and arts institutions. How have these 2 points of entry informed your experience at MASS MoCA?
Well, for a long time, I didn't know anything but MASS MoCA. I
Right.
mean, this was my second job. I was a preparator at the Williams College Museum of Art, and then the director here. So it was what I knew, and it was weird in that way. When I was looking at my colleagues last night who stood up there, who were there particularly at the beginning, it's like, whew, I would really, I think that group of people could build anything, but at the time it wasn't necessarily obvious because they were just out of school or had never had that job before. So there was a bit of, it was kind of a beautiful, naive, I mean, and yeah, it's probably true that if we knew now what we knew then, we would have never have even dreamed to start it. I mean, that was kind of a crazy thing to do. Recently, I've gone to an institution that is, even though it's still young, it's robust and professionally staffed with layers of, it's been around for a while, and it's completely different. It's like,
We can leave it at that.
yeah, exactly. Okay, we will.
Don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I do that every now and then.
When you were starting this project, or maybe as I became aware that MASS MoCA was going to be in existence, I was in Portland, Oregon, and I had left an art museum and founded the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. So I think it was like 28. And in that time period, it was the opposite problem. There was no building, no space. Everything was going to be itinerant in performing arts, in visual practices. And I had read about what you were doing over here, and it was about to open a couple years in. It was going to open, and you had the exact opposite problem. Lots of space, and how, from there. But I think for me, at least at that founding moment, and it relates to it, I wasn't like academically credentialed to become a director and founder of a contemporary art organization. But the willingness to try, right? To be like Mach 10, hair on fire, direct vertical in your learning curve, right? There is something about that 28-year-old or 20-something-year-old that is pushing towards how can I enter, how can I do, how can I be useful? So after a while, I knew it was time for me to leave PICA because it was time for other voices to take it on, and I went and ran the Melbourne International Arts Festival. I was the artistic director. I guess when thinking about coming into MASS MoCA over various trails was that looking at the arc of your artistic histories and that I had relationships with artists in my various comings and goings around the world, and I was accumulating, I guess, what do you call it, skills or perspective or a wisening that made me feel like I maybe could someday be ready for MASS MoCA.
MASS MoCA also serves as an incubator for artists from myriad disciplines. Why did you decide, though, that performing arts was also a part of the vision for MASS MoCA?
Sam Miller told me to. Sam was the director of Jacob's Pillow, and we were friends. And he used to goad me, make fun of me, embarrass me in public, and his questions were always, it was a simple thing. He would just say, every single thing you say about visual artists needing more space and more time and an economic platform in which to work applies to the performing arts. So why do you quit? Why do you keep saying that you're going to be a museum of contemporary art when you're just talking about visual art? So I took it to heart, and then his successor, Ella Baff, one of our early board members and staunch supporters, gave one of the biggest gifts of all time to MASS MoCA. She recommended Rachel Chanoff. And Rachel was my first hire as a curator here. So MASS MoCA was an unusual museum in that its very first curator was a curator of performing arts. And then we decided to build this space, and so suddenly we were in deep trouble. We had this great theater, and then what? That's really how it happened.
Rachel, are you here? Come
Yeah.
here.
Rachel.
Quickly, darling, the
Come
people
on,
are
Rachel.
waiting.
Oh, okay.
Nope, you stay where you are.
But okay.
Rachel, I want to, since you're here, I want to ask you what that was for you to come here and do this thing and to be the first curator.
Well, Joe called me and said, I'm working on a museum called MASS MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts. And I said, who? What? Where? And so I took the train up, and I thought he wanted a list of bands, maybe, to like enter, to entertain who was ever coming to this alleged museum. So quick on the train, I made a list of bands, and he picked me up in Albany. And MASS MoCA hadn't been renovated yet. It was still the factory. And Joe gave me a hard hat, and we walked through it. And I thought, after walking through with Joe Thompson, I thought, I will follow this man anywhere and do anything. And we really wanted to, contemporary art can be so scary and so impenetrable. We were really thinking about, how do you land in a community and don't become an impenetrable fortress of high art? How do you really make it the cultural living room of the town? And so then we thought with Sue Killam, like, really, what do we do to welcome people whose space it already is into the space in a warm embrace? And so that's what we did.
Thank you, Rachel. When you sit at the helm of, When you sit at the helm of any organization, there's a unique opportunity to set in place your vision for the institution, to determine its culture, and to establish a dialogue with the surrounding community. Joe, as MASS MoCA's founder, what environment did you seek to create? And Kristy, I want to ask you the same question, if you would both answer that.
Welcoming and fun, I think, were my two most important things. And I knew that if it was welcoming and fun, and we had really great artists, like you, Helga, that the rest would follow. I mean, and so we made decisions, and some of them were kind of odd. I mean, one of my best friends, and in some ways one of the co-authors of MASS MoCA, along with Tom, was Michael Govan, and he was about at the same time developing what I think of as MASS MoCA version 1, Dia Beacon. And Dia Beacon is a place with large spaces with very beautiful large works of installation from a very constricted timeline. And it's so exquisitely done, but every shade of gray is the same shade of gray, and it's incredibly disciplined in every single thing. The uniforms are beautiful and starched, and the whole process of walking in feels, it's lovely, but it feels like you're going to a museum in some ways. It has a kind of institutional, and so we decided that our staff would be dressed a little more informally, and we were going to let the buildings reveal their legacy and their history, so you could feel we didn't level every single floor, and we kept things a little rougher at the edge. Part of that was driven by money, but part was really driven by a sense of making it as warm and welcoming as you could possibly be, and because I never worried about the art and the quality of the art. So I think those were our guide stars. Like make people want to come, and make people want to come back, and invite them in. Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned the thing about the staff. I can't tell you how many places I've been, and I think probably many people here, you've been and you get to the door, and immediately there's an issue.
Yeah.
And that you can not feel greeted or welcome, and that there are all of these things set up to corral us into left and right and good seats and less good seats and balconies and, well, you can come here if you paid this extra bit for this exhibition. And there's a lot of separation once you get inside, but the separation really begins at the door. And I'm so happy that this is a place where that's been thought about already. At the door has already been taken into account in terms of the culture of the entire organization. And that the folks here, I was speaking with Bob Faust yesterday, who has an installation here, and you should all take a moment to go and check it out. And he said, everyone here is so nice. And it makes such a difference when people are nice and they are also competent and they love their work. It's a completely different way to make work and, as I said first, to invite people into a space. Kristy, will you just continue with your thoughts?
Well, I was just going to respond because I think it's really true. When you first walk in the door, there's often a distance to travel, a very long one, before you hit the perfect admission desk. There's not very many routes you can take besides there in a lot of museums. Here, when you walk in the door, you can smell bacon. Where does that happen? You're confronted with like this cacophony of, am I supposed to go this way or that way or this in the gift shop? Like where am I? And in a weird way, there's a truth in that confrontation, in a nice way, of, this is a place of, and you've said it multiple times, and we do as well, where people can choose their own adventure. I think for me, this is also a time of, going back to the tendrils of your original question, one of the things when I thought about being here, it was very much that I'm coming from a sense of understanding what artists we're facing in culture and how much the questions of cultural institutions have changed across the country. And coming out of the pandemic, it was still on, but coming out of it, the number of different artists that had been truly deeply imperiled and changed over the shutdown of stages across the country and the world, the economy around what is their livelihood, the yearning of communities to find one another again while watching parts of our isolation or our bizarre and wonderful ways of trying to break through it. Visual artists, exhibitions that had been, this is going to be a rolling multi-year of how do we come through it? And do we snap back to the models that we had before, or do we embrace what is now a rolling change that is coming up with another set of voices to affect the culture and to ask of its institutions something different? For me, inside of MASS MoCA, because of what had been built around points of liberty, around things that had not been closed, around things that had not been made perfect, but were made authentic and honestly true together. Like, there's a crack in that seam, but someday we'll get to it, or maybe not. That somehow this was one of those kinds of places that in carrying a future forward to this other moment that fundamentally shifted for our artistic world, this was a place that could be still that safe haven and that belonging and that way of repair and restoration and recovery along with our communities. That is now in sync and in some ways. And so to me, that was so, that there are residencies that you can say, Sue in the performing arts and all of that team, you could have enough folks there that were able to say, come in and make yourself, come here. You can come here. Those things matter, and they permeate throughout the institution when somebody is also endeavoring to create the greatest expressive truth as they can with time, space, usually limited amounts of resources, and the access to be conjoined by others that say, I don't know how, but I'm with you. This is a place that does it, and that is a sense of welcome. And even if people go and say it's too abstract or it's unusual or I don't understand what that was or there's an atonality in that music that I find I don't know what to do with, there's still a sense of belonging and a willingness to move towards that which we don't understand in order to have, I guess, the soul stretch within a place that is not going to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
Some of what that's beautiful. Some of that too is I just think this particular site that we're so blessed with here, these buildings are so noble that some of it I think comes from rather unexpected transparency that exists through, and some of that it was here, but a lot of it was built by Simeon and Brunner Kott's really lovely work. These were, when you look at them from the outside, they're these big, hulking, red, seemingly dark, rather foreboding structures from the outside. From the inside, they're full of a shocking amount of light. The windows are big. The architects did a really beautiful job cutting these sight lines that go down sometimes for, 2 city blocks you can see, and they give you overlooks and underlooks, and there's this beautiful moment inside the entry lobby where you see out immediately to the next courtyard sea. All that literal transparency you can see, and there's so much multiple. I think it has a physiological effect on people almost, and it's people can see. And most museums are boxes and restrained and constricted, and there's no side light ever coming in. You don't quite know. Here you can always, you might get lost, but I don't think we've ever lost anybody for good.
Not for good. Not for good. But there is something remarkable too. There's, obviously it is a space where there is security, but the museum attendants are there to also talk and discuss with the work. I think many people feel like they're not being surveilled or patrolled inside of their dynamic emotional experience with either the space, the windows,
Why do you think
and or
that?
the art.
I think you're touched on something, but I've noticed that kids feel more liberated here than they feel in most places. Why do you think that is? I've often what? I mean,
because their parents aren't worried.
They're not grabbing them.
No, it's
security's
that thing of they can run, and I love sometimes I'll sit in the prow with my laptop to do things, and I can hear what's going on with the visitors, and when you hear a kid like, "Mom, I'm over here,"
yeah.
and where, where is here exactly? But that the impulse for I think it's about the kid, but kids will do. It's the parents here or the carer or whoever that instead of saying no, say
or a guard
go
saying no.
Yeah, or a guard saying no. So there is a way of just all our messy human beings belonging, but not instead of restricting ourselves before we try, we try.
I want to read you this quote because it kind of shook me. It's from Harriet Lerner's The Dance of Intimacy. In our rapidly changing society, we can count on only 2 things that will never change. What will never change is the will to change and the fear of change. It is the will to change that motivates us to seek help. It is the fear of change that motivates us to receive the very help we need. What do you think? And I read this because I'm thinking about how small the aperture seems to be becoming. And
you used aperture kind of metaphorically, but what?
Because Kristy said it.
Yeah.
And Kristy said it in the context of what fear or what the new does, what the unknown does to us, to us as a society, because we get afraid of what we don't know, and we don't engage either, perhaps, with someone. I don't want to speak so broadly, but And I want to really be careful about that and honor the people who are not in this situation. But with regard to MASS MoCA and the way that maybe now there are books no one wants you to read, or certain subjects that are being resisted to being taught in schools, how are we going to resist here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, by, fiercely bringing art forward and do it again and then do it again and then do it again. I mean, I think the amplitude of the programming here, I loved watching this sizzle reel that was playing when we came in for many reasons. One, it made me jealous, and it made me a little sad that I'd missed a lot of that work. But it also reminded me of the power of this place when you're blessed with space and time and great artists. What can happen? I mean, we saw 100 images of sometimes very challenging work that just flashed before our eyes. And yeah, it was set to jaunty music and came with a certain rhythm and pace and uplifting joy. But if you looked at what the art was there, a lot of that was relatively hard-hitting, interesting, beautiful things. And I think that the wonderful thing about this place is that it's been at it for 25, and I cannot wait. I mentioned last night that there's 11,000 creative souls have been through here. 11,000 artists and performers and people. And I think if you just keep that coming, your worries and your closing apertures will take care of itself.
But here's what I want to interject there. I am familiar with so many institutions right now who are having a hard time because their boards don't like something that someone has said, because there are protesters outside of their museums. And so that the optics of an issue then become the responsibility of someone to do something about, which often means that we're not going to do this thing, or perhaps we'll do it another time. And this kind of editing and constriction and the closing of the aperture is a very real thing, and that our hope, what do they say? Our hopes and, what's the thing they say after, our thoughts and whatever that is. You know what that is. Yes, that. Those aren't the things that are going to keep not only the doors open, but keep the work and the vision moving forward. And I guess in a way I'm asking a much more practical question.
Have you found that it's changed any of the pressures that Helga just talked about, and the forces and the risk and the what if? Has it changed the way you and your colleagues here have thought about work in the last 2 years? And I agree, yeah, that's going on, but has it really changed the way you think about anything you do here?
Everything we do here is continuously changing and evolving. There is no doubt about that. So what I would say in response is that it's not changing us in terms of like, okay, this can't happen, right? Mm-hmm. We're not being pushed to answer certain kinds of questions now, but we forever always are, right? So to me, it's again, it's that thing about not being cavalier. To provoke and poke something that we don't yet know is coming would be irresponsible for an institution. To hold the moment that artists and communities are seeking to have a dialogue around through the means that we have available to us to do, we would absolutely ensure is taking place, right? but not to answer that question, but to hold those questions and to facilitate that. I mean, when you talked about the 11,000 creative souls that have come through here, meaning artists and performers and whatnot, there's also the extraordinary, now would be in the millions, of creative souls who have come through here vis-a-vis visiting, being audience, being design, being architects, being inquirious, right? Being full of curiosity or being willing to look towards something that's unfamiliar or unproven or unreviewed or not yet famed, etc., is a form of creativity. And here people do it. And you can do it in a tuxedo or flannel. You can do it in your fishing shorts or your thongs. You know what I mean? There's a way in which people get to feel themselves, I think, by coming closer to the work that happens here. And that level of creativity is, I think, our best and highest responsibility.
So then what new collaborations have become crucial in guarding against MASS MoCA becoming a more conventional organization?
Well, you know, one of the things I felt like I was a time traveler when I got here, because it was 2.5 years ago. I knew the 25th was coming. A 25th anniversary is a big deal. I was brand new, and I would have to start working on that future. I also was having to learn both the past or questions or why might things be this way, and how do I discover authentically? Because there's a moment in time where you can be, you're both a burden and a blessing. You're a burden because you don't know the answers to all the things and all the histories and all the things. And you're a blessing because people, if you are willing to share theirs with you and school you, and you can discover things anew. So there was that going on, and there was also the need to write a strategic plan and to begin the process of working on the next, and for us now, it's the next 7-year strategic plan ahead. That was a very intensive process. You're planning 7 years into what you can get your board, staff, community, patrons, artists, stakeholders to help imagine 7 years ahead, right? While planning a 25-year anniversary, right? And just trying to stand in the present moment and hold my ground in some way. But what I think is remarkable and important in that strategic plan is it is a process that we took. We did it DIY. We didn't hire in consultants. We really worked it, board meeting after board meeting, committees, staff, everyone, in order to find it. And in it, and part of the language started to look at more of, you know, sustainability, and that's a big piece of it. I think the mayor the other day said something really beautiful that, you know, the chapter of MASS MoCA so far has been to build it up, and now the job is to build it out. And that is actually embedded in the strategic plan. But some of the emeriti trustees and other trustees said, we think the language associated with artists and that creativity to provoke, you know, when we as a culture need to have our complacencies disrupted by the form that our artists has endeavored to do, sometimes that is to remind us and reinsert something that reminds us how something sublime and beautiful actually is true. And sometimes it's to shake us to a state of being awake to a condition that we are in need of. It's in need of our full attention, right? What they were provoking in the strategic plan was to assure that that language was embedded in the strategic plan around artistic experience as led and driven by artists. That's really significant, y'all.
Yeah, it really is.
That's not like, I think we should do the traveling show of the original Disney animation cells because it will sell tickets at the front door and it's familiar and people will feel better. It's about doing the heart and soul of working with artists in a durable way. So that part is intact.
I loved last night at the gala reading some of the descriptions for MASS MoCA before you opened the doors. MASS MoCA was being referred to as preposterous, bizarre, and a joke. And then, eventually, it was written, MASS MoCA becomes a showpiece. So I would love to, actually, let's play our audio clip now, and then I will ask the rest of this question. Do you live in North Adams?
I do. 5 minutes from where you're going.
Okay. Have you been there for
My whole life.
your whole life? So your parents were there also?
They were.
How about your grandparents?
That I don't know.
Would you say that the town has changed a lot since
A
you
lot.
were?
Since I was a kid,
Yeah.
oh, you can't imagine the difference.
In what ways?
Well, now it's for the better, but it wasn't for a while. Because all the businesses closed.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, if it wasn't for MoCA taking off like it did, we were gone.
Wow.
That's how bad it was.
Do you think people resent places like MASS MoCA?
Do they resent it?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what. When they first proposed making MoCA,
Uh-huh.
the town people laughed at it.
Oh.
They ain't laughing now.
Do you think people who live in the towns, so let's say in North Adams, in Pittsfield, in Williamstown, I'm not talking about the people who go to school or the people who are tourists. I mean local people. Do they, or you, have you been to MASS MoCA?
I have not. I do this every day of the week. I don't have time to go.
Okay.
I work 7 days a week.
Yeah.
That's my choice.
Yep. But you're never curious to see what's there or to go
Well,
to a
there's been
concert?
a few exhibits that I wanted to go to,
Uh-huh.
but didn't make. Because I work. I didn't have the time to go.
Yeah. Well, do you have interest in going? You would like to go sometimes, yes?
One of these days I will.
And do you think there's something the museum could do to make it easier for you as a person of the community to go?
No,
No.
I work.
Okay.
I'm doing what I like,
I see.
and that's work.
Yep.
Always been that way.
This
Thank
is
you
what
for doing
happens
that.
when you give an artist an invitation to come and talk to you. And what happens, though, and I think it's not very different than what happens here as a practice, is that your art is everywhere. And whatever questions you're asking get answered by the world, perhaps, or by life, perhaps in a way you hadn't anticipated. I thought that this conversation was super interesting because you have a person who has 2 generations at least of people who have been here, but who doesn't come to the museum, and also doesn't think there's anything you can do to get him here, because he has a different set of priorities. I want to ask, do you want to say something? No. Okay. If you could speak to where we are with regard to attracting more vast audiences and expanding MASS MoCA's reach within this surrounding community.
Well, I'm going to jump in on it on a couple of levels. And one of the things is we have found, well, first, we're here at Community Day, right? Community Day, free, open, we add a lot of other content. Mountain One Bank has formed a partnership with us, and they, over the next 5 years, help us in supporting the family days and the community days, which is a really significant thing. Our, community bank that is like right on it. But also we'll be partners on that. How do we reach and expand audience connectivity? And so thank you, Mountain One. Yeah. But I also think it's really important. I've heard that a lot too. When I was very first here, there's this moment where you're in the newspaper for a minute, that kind of thing. And so people were like, hey, you're the new, person. And this one gentleman was talking to me, and then he invited me up onto his porch, and he said, yeah, I hate that thing. I hate MASS MoCA. I don't get it. I don't know what all that art stuff's doing over there. And I was like, I'm feeling increasingly welcome with each passing moment. And I'd like to welcome you. No. But here was the really significant thing. He said, but now it matters so much to me because my granddaughter has decided to move back to North Adams because the town is no longer, or the city is no longer in her mind, something that's dead. So that is the way, and so he said, so don't fuck it up. But I just want to add really quickly here, we in the arts think that at all times, if we're not reaching almost messianically more and more to come into attend our world, because it is special, and it is full of soul, and it is a kind of expression of the love of a stranger, because artists are making something for someone they don't know. And that very thing is a duty of neighborly care that I think is super significant. At the same time, the art and the work of the artist have already affected a man who will have no interest in coming here, but respects it because the granddaughter does. Those kinds of things are also the way in which art moves in the world. And so to me, it's, of course we can move back the barriers economically and various other kinds of things to create those invitations and tributaries. But at the same time, it's not that that it becomes a transformational moment, right? Always, all the time, and if we just do more of that, we're doing what we do. We are doing what we do, and it's an enduring, rolling evolve. For one other just thing is that we also here make work with MASS MoCA. Art fabricators, buildings and grounds, they are making work with artists over periods of time. The production crew here, lighting design, various kinds of things, the rehearsals, the developments, the solving of problems. When we peel back the process through which how artists are seeking ways and one another to find form and to hit this elusive vision of what makes it, you know, the notes, the space between the notes, right? All of the things. When a public has access to us working in that endeavor, not always the end result, sometimes I think that brings closer. So that's one of the things that we're working on at MASS MoCA is what is the experience of the visitor that is actually bringing us into community and relationship with artists as they try. Not just, what do you think now that it's done?
Mm-hmm. Kristy, you said something last night that struck me, which is you reminded us all that there's a whole generation, actually now almost two generations, kids who have come to MASS MoCA. There's a bunch of 20 and 21 and 23-year-old kids who, for the last 17 years of their life, have visited MASS MoCA every year at least once, if not twice, usually. When a whole town essentially has every kid in every elementary and middle school who visits every single year with really wonderful curricular support and fun adventures, that will have dividends that we can't even dream of right now. And it's going to be really interesting to watch. So that's one thing. Secondly, to answer your question a little bit, I remember when we were, it took forever to get this place launched, I think 12 or 13 years. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And one of the things I would do is make it like a habitual circuit to the Lions Club and the Rotary Club, and man, it was tough sell. And then I would also spend a lot of time in the schools, actually, just going and participating in every way we could, and that was so much easier to talk. To talk about what was going to happen and to show images and you could feel delight and interest, and the teachers were incredibly welcoming. And so there's something about what you said that's like where you want to pay your attention. And then my only last point on I know that voice. I literally know that voice, and I'll just say this, that when we were trying to cajole public opinion and move money in people's minds and hearts, it wasn't bad that the only alternative to a museum here was a prison.
Yeah.
And if you have to do something that's hard and that's a little bit of a list, a little bit against the grain, and that people are somewhat skeptical about, competing against a prison, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. There's also, just to say, on a different day in a random encounter, if you were with your mic, one of the people that I met early, older fella, North Adams, down the line, multi-generation, the whole thing, who became a member of MASS MoCA, and he comes usually on Wednesdays, he told me. He just goes up to see if the Louise Bourgeois are there, because he was like, I can't believe that lives in my community. These are things, this belongs to me. This belongs to me, and I get to say that. And so he comes over to check on it a lot. And that has led to like the Laurie Andersons and the various. And that too is a way that art creates different belonging. Yeah.
I have 2 questions left. I can't take credit for this next question because it was on my Williams College admissions application. And the question is, to comment on an experience that has helped you discern or define a value you hold.
Is that all?
Just one.
Let's cue that sizzle reel.
They must have changed the application between. I don't know. You know, there's you get to spend 20 years at a place like this for one thing, and you have that kind of experience over and over again. I must say, that's one of the. This was a hard project to get done, but it was worth it in so many ways. And selfishly, for me, it was worth it just because you learn a lot if you listen. And being able to be here with my kids, it's awesome. Mm-hmm. To see art through the eyes of your kids, that's great. So I think maybe I would say it like that, maybe, just to be able to have a sustained relationship with art and music with my kids, watching them go from nothing to...
Thank you. Kristy?
My grandfather was a bridge builder and an engineer and up in the Pacific Northwest. And after he'd retired and he'd kind of handmade his own place and all that kind of thing, he had all his kids and my parents had given him this poem, which is an old Scottish poem, but it talks about the bridge builder. But what it's actually saying is it's talking about an older person who finds the passage of a certain kind of difficult terrain not so hard because he's done it a few times. And instead of continuing on, he stops and he lays paving stones. And this other person is up there saying, why on earth would you be endeavoring to do this? It's going to be dark soon, you're old, my God, your back's got to hurt, whatever. And he describes that what is not hard for him or has become possible for him over time may be hard for someone else. So if you stop and you leave the paving stones, the chance of that someone else to ease the way, to me, is the value. And I think artists do that for our culture. And I think those of us who are working in leadership in this country, in arts and not-for-profit, we're having to move at the speed of capitalism in order to protect the speed of culture. And the speed of culture is what upholds the capacity of communities. And ultimately, our not-for-profit institutions and our democracy and all of the things bend and weave and do its very kinds of evolution. But artists ignite us to understand what those very value systems even might be. And we move now at the speed of things, here at MASS MoCA, the speed of the beautiful chance.
Thank you. My last question, before we close out the afternoon, is what's with the hats?
I love your hats.
Yeah, two things.
Likes my hats.
One is,
I
I'm
wasn't
fair. I don't
disparaging
know.
your
I'm fair skinned, and I've watched my father and his face, and it's just like, why don't you just wear a hat? Just wear a hat. And it was going to save so much trouble. And so about 20 years ago, I started wearing a hat, and then it had a secondary benefit. We do these concerts and festivals here, and I'm tall, and I found out if I put on a hat, everybody could find me right away. So it's like when the trash needed taken out, or something happened, or a person needed help, or I had a complaint, or Sue needed to find me, or whatever, they could just find me really quick. So it was like an emergency locator beacon.
I think with me, it's when I become very focused on certain things that are going on, the tasks at hand, time is going by, I'm very focused. My hair starts to grow, pretty soon I look like something out of the Partridge Family. And that, to date myself, and that 1970s really fascinating look requires a hat to come out. That's the truth.
I want to say thank you to Kristy and Joe for this
Helga, thank
conversation,
you.
and thank you all
Thank you,
for
Helga.
coming.
Thank you.